Dear Heavenly Father, we come to you in prayer right now, knowing our limitations, but knowing your unlimitless love. We appreciate everything that you've done and are still doing in our lives. We've all had issues for this past month, Father, but we know that you are with us and you're very close right now. We ask that you bless this meeting, help us to all learn something, help it to be a ministry into our hearts, and keep us all safe through the next few weeks, Lord, and keep us in your will, in your plan, and in your vision, Father. Amen.
Amen. All right, let's see, share screen. This is it. Share. All right, that's not where I want to begin. And okay, this is where I want to begin. Okay, show don't tell. Show don't tell is a technique that works in nonfiction as well as fiction. Showing paints a picture with words that engages the reader's imagination to fill in the blanks. The reader knows a character is angry or sad or happy, not because the author told them. They know because the actions of the character told them. Showing is an active and concrete way to create mental images in the reader that brings the story to life. Classics like Moby Dick have a lot of telling. So you might think, well, you know, classics had a lot of telling. What's wrong with doing a lot of telling right now? Well, if you notice, this is the first edition of Moby Dick by Herman Melville, and it was published in 1851. The primary form of communication in the 1800s was the newspaper, letters, and messages via the telegraph, all things that people read. The people of that era had a greater tolerance for narration and little expectation for something more visual because the primary way they received information was not visual. Then in the 1920s, radio became popular, which added hearing to the way people receive information. The 1920s gave us Percy Lubbock's book, The Craft of Fiction, that drew a distinction between telling and showing. Initially, his fellow authors found his ideas about showing controversial and condemned him for it. And today it is a mantra, show don't tell. New ideas are often tossed aside as useless, and you find out that they're not. Then in 1965, Truman Capote published In Cold Blood as a nonfiction novel that told the true story about multiple murders in a small farming community. Capote used elements of fiction, including show don't tell, to tell a nonfiction story. And it eventually became a new genre that is either called the nonfiction novel or creative nonfiction. Then television became popular in the 1950s. TV added receiving information through moving pictures. Computers followed in the 1980s. And then the internet became popular in the 1990s, opening the information highway that buried us in information received by reading, by hearing, and by moving images. The fact is, we write for a different generation that is acclimated to receiving information instantly and often visually. I can understand why show don't tell has become a mantra in today's publishing. Showing is active and visual, and telling can be abstract and passive. And today, everybody has their cell phones and they get information instantly, often in video. Now, let's look at an example of telling and showing and see how it can expand what we're doing. The telling example: the night was cold and moonlit. The sleigh moved fast through the forest. I don't know if I could make this smaller. So, okay, move fast through the forest. Now, this is two brief sentences of telling that communicate a lot of data. We can look at this and we know it's night. We know it's cold. We know there's full moon. We know there's a sleigh that's moving fast through the forest. We don't know how cold and we don't know how fast. But there's something even more important, even though it is factual, brief, and efficient, there is something important missing. There's nothing in these facts to stir the reader's emotions. Let's look at an example of showing. There we go. This. Oh, I don't know what I'm going to do with us here. Okay, maybe along the bottom will be better. Okay, it's the same in the telling is now told with showing. Abby peered through her tears into the clear night and clutched the fur blankets tighter. She'd known winters before, but never this far north and never this deep. Her tears became icicles hanging from her eyelashes. Crystals of ice covered her face where her own breath had frozen solid. Their sleigh raced through the whispering pines like a feather drawn over a sheet of silver. Abby shuddered. Mama said hell was hot. What is different about this example? What does this one have that the other one didn't?
Emotion, a character.
A character, a human-centered. This one is human-centered. That one is fact-centered. Now, we can feel concern for Abby because we can identify with the human experience. We also know more than it's cold. We know how cold. The tears on her eyelashes. This thing's wanting to restart. Go away. Okay, it's really cold when your tears are forming icicles on your eyelashes and your breath is forming crystals of ice on her face. So we can get that concept that she's really cold even with her fur blankets. And we know that she's crying, not because the author told us she's crying. We know because she's peering through her tears. So the author is not telling you what's happening. The author is showing you. And then from that, you can develop an image in your mind of what's happening. Now, it's not efficient. Now, we also know she feels betrayed by her mother and she's racing toward hell, but not because the author told us. We know because she shuddered when she thought Mama said hell was hot. In other words, Mama lied to me. Could be Mama in the sleigh with her. We don't know. Their sleigh tells us Abby's not alone. But we don't know who's with her. Is she a prisoner? Whoever she's with cared enough to give her fur blankets to keep her warm. Could be her mother. She compares her destination to hell, but it's not the fire and brimstone hell of the Bible. I see Cassandra connecting. And the only way to answer those questions is to keep reading. So showing can be more effective in pulling the writer into the story and letting them use their imagination, but leaving enough blanks that I got to keep reading to find out what happened. Now, there are strengths and weaknesses to both showing and telling. The challenge is in balance. You don't want it to all be showing. Some things just need to be told. Things that are maybe inconsequential, like she opened the door. If you say she entered the room, you don't need to say she opened the door, unless there's something relevant to what you are telling in the story that we need to know she opened the door. Now, finding balance can be difficult. Most authors do not have a problem telling, and that is why I'm focusing on strengthening our writing through showing. But how do we know what to show? To find the balance of showing and telling, ask yourself what's important in the story. Because once you've decided what's important, show what's important and tell the rest. To help you show what's important, we will learn about things to use, things to avoid, and things that are better shown than told. Things you can use to add more showing are details, nouns, verbs, the 5 senses, dialogue, and metaphors. So we'll look at each one of those. First, let's look at use details. Don't say the house is spooky. Say the house has dark windows, shattered lanterns, an overgrown path leading to a doorway covered in cobwebs. Don't tell the reader Kate is angry. Describe how Kate bangs the table with her clenched fist, her face turning red and screaming, "I can't believe it." So if you show her doing those things, you don't have to tell the reader that she's angry, because the reader can derive that from what they see, the picture that you paint with your words. Don't say the waitress' eyes are blue. Say her eyes are as blue as the neon in the flickering sign outside Frankie's Grill. That gives you a more visual image of just how blue those eyes are and just how stunning. Okay, the next thing we can use to show are nouns. Using nouns and verbs, with the exception of to be verbs, will force you to describe. People can't see homelessness, but they can see cardboard shelters, trash can fires, and bag ladies. People can't see relaxation, but they can see a porch, a hammock, a glass of lemonade, and things that suggest relaxing. Look at the example. The postman stared at the dog's angry fangs. What do you see? Everybody might have a different image, and depending on the image, it might be a fearful situation or a humorous situation, because dog is vague. Because we don't know the breed of the dog, it's hard to see what's going on. By changing one word, you can show the dog and define the scene with either fear or humor. For example, the postman stared at the Doberman's angry fangs. Dobermans are known to be guard dogs, attack dogs, so we know that this is a fearful situation for the postman. Or we could say, the postman stared at the Chihuahua's angry fangs. Now we've changed through showing that by showing a Chihuahua instead of a Doberman, it's kind of humorous. What's a little 5-pound Chihuahua going to do even if his fangs are angry? So if the postman faces a dog on the porch, it matters whether it is a Chihuahua who is all noise and no muscle, or a Doberman he would be wise to avoid if he can get away without getting bit. Use verbs. A verb expresses action that can give life to your writing, but pay careful attention to the verbs you use, because it makes the difference between plain, placid prose and compelling, colorful composition. For example, we could tell the reader the car went down the street. What kind of image does that evoke? Could be something in every one of your minds, because it depends on how the car went down the street and maybe what the car is. The sentence tells us very little because it lacks specifics. A stronger verb would paint a more vivid picture. So somewhere in the writing process, you might want to look at every verb and ask yourself, is there a better option? Can another word do the job with greater vividness and creativity? For example, we could say, the truck skidded down the street toward the boys playing basketball. Now we've created, through showing, not telling, a fearful situation. Will the truck stop in time? Will it hit the boys playing the basketball? Or we could say, the school bus careened down the street. Again, we haven't. Excuse me?
Okay.
Okay.
Lawnmower outside or something?
Okay. Everybody's still on?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, y'all still got me because I just got internet unstable. God forbid that happens again. Okay. The school bus careened down the street. Well, when we say school bus, we think of children in the school bus. And if it's careening, it's out of control. So again, we have a fearful situation that we are showing the reader instead of just saying the car or bus or whatever went down the street. One more example. My brand new Mercedes chugged down the street. Now that tells you right there, we have a very unhappy buyer, and he's probably chugging his way back to the dealership to trade it in for a better model. So you see how the words that you use can create images or create no images. But it is the images and the use of your imagination that really keeps a reader wanting to keep reading because they are seeing it and they are involved in it. Something else you can use are the 5 senses. Using see, hear, smell, touch, and taste helps readers to recall their own experiences with things they have seen, heard, smelled, touched, or tasted, pulling them into the story. Sight is pretty commonly used. So you could say he saw the river, which is kind of a vague image. And it is, seeing something is most often used sense in writing because it's natural to write about what you see. But try looking beyond what others see, a blue sky, green grass, to details of color, shape, and size. For example, the shamrock green of the open expanse curved around a small grove of trees, then down toward the river. Now let's look at touch. We could say, she touched my shoulder, or he touched my shoulder. But the way things feel is more than just texture and temperature. Like the other senses, it can be personal. We could say, her hand on my shoulder stirred faded memories of love long forgotten. Now we've gone from simply feeling something to what the person is actually feeling from that touch. And it's a little more interesting to read and adds a deeper dimension to what you're trying to communicate. The next is hearing. We could say, her voice was sensual. A lot of times we use loud, soft, yell, whisper, angry, and all kinds of other adjectives for sound, but have you ever thought about using something more personal, like her sensual voice enticed me to draw closer and savor each syllable. Now we know more than her voice was sensual. We know that her voice is drawing the other character to draw close to her and to really respond to what she is saying. Writers tend to focus on the senses of sight, touch, and hearing, but smell and taste can be just as evocative. We could tell the reader the alley smelled bad. Smell is a sense that is different for each of us. What I think is a bad smell, someone might not be bothered by it. Someone might think a perfume smells wonderful. Another person, it might sting their nose and they don't really like the smell. So words like stink and pungent are great to use, but you can go deeper. You might say the alley smelled of urine, cigarettes, and stale beer, and assault to the nose and eyes alike. Now we have a sense of how that person feels. And he might be rubbing his eyes and holding his nose because it really smells bad. Another one is taste. Taste is difficult to get across in a book. Most know what bacon tastes like if we say it tastes like bacon. But what about doing something unique? If you think about it, taste is more than just something your brain interprets from your taste buds. It's also texture. So we could say, the undercooked bacon laid on my tongue like a sopping rag dripping grease. Okay, I can tell just from your response that had a lot stronger effect on you than just simply saying the undercooked bacon tasted bad. So you can see how you can strengthen your writing through being a little more descriptive, and using metaphors helps a lot of the time, which I use metaphor in that one. Now, another thing you can use to show is to use dialogue. One of the easiest ways to avoid telling is dialogue. Any dialogue line you use is always showing, because dialogue reflects what's happening in the scene, moment by moment, and it's never the author speaking. It's a character speaking. Dialogue can also help with characterization, provide emotion, accentuate mood, and allows readers to explore the scene as if they were there. So instead of telling your readers, Don Pedro is a powerful man, you could do something like this, which is a little bit of telling in dialogue. Lisa leaned over the table and tilted her head left. The guy in the white suit who just got off the Rolls Royce, that's Don Pedro, she muttered. He always gets what he wants. People who get in his way disappear, and the police are afraid to arrest him. So the dialogue shows us a white suit, a Rolls Royce, but it also reveals that this person gets his way and why he gets his way. People disappear. People with the power to stop him are afraid to. And the telling in this snippet is not a problem, because the person talking is the character and not the author in the dialogue. Now, you need to be aware that dialogue tags can be a form of telling. A dialogue tag is the little attachment to a dialogue line that assigns who spoke. For example, she said. That would be a dialogue tag. In our example, we have, you always go for the biggest sandwich, she said, jokingly. Most of the time, you would do better not to use an ly adverb and let your character express their demeanor through dialogue and action. You can use body language, which makes for great showing and will paint a nice image in your reader's mind. We could say, oh, you always go for the biggest sandwich. She laughed and slapped his arm. Usually when somebody's laughing and slapping your arm, we know they're joking. So you're not telling the reader that she was joking. You show the reader that she was joking. Yeah. And then this one, which we have touched on a little bit already, is to use metaphors. A metaphor is a figure of speech in which a word or phrase is applied to an object or an action to which it is not literally applicable. For example, in the left corner, there is a chair and a desk. To the right is a bed. When describing a setting, there is a tendency to make a list, which is basically what's in this example. We're just listing what we see in the room. But metaphors can make the list visual. We could say, the desk crouched in one corner like a homeless man, shabby and layered with dirt. The bed was as wide and blue as an ocean. Now, the desk is not a homeless man, but comparing it to one tells us the desk is rarely, if ever, used. And a bed cannot be as wide as the ocean, but comparing it to the ocean tells us it's big, probably king size. Metaphors can also define a better image of your character. For example, you could say, tell, he was tall and burly. Or you could say the man was built like a storage locker, not the ones you find at gyms and amusement parks, but the lockers you keep guns in, big guns, and lots of them. He was built like one of those, which gives you just the idea he's not one of these tiny little amusement park lockers that are enough to hold your purse or your wallet, but he's big and he's strong. The idea of guns gives the implication that he is strong and powerful like a gun. Okay, let's move on to things to avoid. To put more showing in your writing, avoid adverbs that modify verbs, adverbs that modify adjectives, vague adjectives, and to be verbs. Let's look at the first one. An adverb is an all-purpose modifier that describes a verb, an adjective, or another adverb. An easy way to find adverbs is to look for words that end in ly, but not always, and I'll show you that in a minute. Let's look at our example. Adverbs modify verbs by telling you in one word how, when, where, or why. When an adverb modifies a verb, you can always remove the adverb, usually always remove the adverb and pick a more visual verb. Okay, we have Abby, which is the noun and subject of the sentence. Then we have walked, which is the verb. It's what Abby is doing. Then we have quickly, which is modifying, not Abby, but modifying how Abby walked. Abby walked quickly. If you delete the word quickly, you change the meaning of the sentence to Abby walked. And that's not the same as Abby walked quickly. So instead of deleting quickly, try replacing walked quickly to paint a more precise and vivid image with a noun or verb. For example, Abby jogged. That gives us a better idea of what she's doing. Abby ran. We know she's going faster than a jog now. And probably the best is Abby sprinted through the field like a hungry hyena pursuing an antelope. That gives us an even more visual idea of how fast she's walking, actually sprinting now. Okay, let's look at avoid adverbs that modify adjectives. Adverbs modify adjectives by telling you how or to what extent. Now, in the example, again, we have Abby, which is the subject. Is a state of being verb. A is an article. Very is an adverb, but it's not modifying girl. She's not a very girl. She's a crazy girl, which is the adjective describing the girl. And then very is upping the crazy a little bit, but we don't really know how much. The word very is vague. It doesn't define a clear picture. If you delete very, we have Abby as a crazy girl, which might not be strong enough. The following choices might be better than very crazy. Abby is bonkers. Abby is loony. Abby is nutty as a fruitcake. Any of those can convey whatever you're trying to convey in a stronger way. Now, let's go to choose adverbs that paint a vivid picture. Don't edit all the adverbs out of your work. Another option is to choose an adverb that paints a precise and vivid picture. For example, we have, her friend is really beautiful. The adverb really is a bit vague, but you don't always have to choose a stronger noun or adverb. Sometimes you can choose a descriptive adverb. Her friend is breathtakingly beautiful. So really is not that strong. But when you use this another ly word, which is more descriptive, breathtakingly beautiful. It ups the image of what Abby really looks like. Okay, we need to avoid vague adjectives. Another way to show is to avoid vague adjectives. An adjective is a word that describes or clarifies a noun by giving information about an object, size, shape, age, color, origin, or material. But be cautious of vague adjectives like interesting, beautiful, lovely, exciting. It's better to use specific details that create an image. So let's look at the example. The smelly dog ran toward me. This is an article. This is an adjective that is modifying the noun dog. Ran is the verb. Toward is an adverb. And me is a pronoun. Now the adjective is smelly. Smelly is describing the dog, but how can you show your reader the dog is smelly? By the actions of the one smelling the dog. You could write, Abby wrinkled her nose as the dog approached and then tried to sneeze the stench away, which gives a more vivid image of just a smelly dog running toward a person. And of course, we could change dog to a breed of dog because a Chihuahua smelly dog is not as bad as a St. Bernard running towards you that is smelly. All right. Avoid to be verbs. The verb to be is a linking verb showing the existence or the condition of the subject. Am, is, are, was, were, being, been, be, were, and be are all to be verbs. Using variations of to be, he was, she is, it was, lead to quick labeling rather than showing. For example, you can just say Mary is sad or John is fast. Mary and John are the subject of these sentences, and the corresponding verb is and was is a form of to be. Mary is sad, John was fast. When you come across these variations, ask yourself, how did I notice she is sad or he was fast? The answer usually gives you a list of descriptions that show instead of tell. What kind of things do you see a person do when they're sad? Crying tells me someone's sad, but she could be crying for joy. Sometimes people start crying when they're laughing. So you might try something like, tears ran down Mary's face in tiny rivers as George told his tragic story. What kind of things do you observe that tell you someone is fast? You could give him a disadvantage in a race and he still wins. How about, John stumbled when the starting gun fired, but sailed past his challengers to win with a quarter-mile lead. So he entered at a disadvantage, but he still wins with a quarter-mile lead. That tells you John is really fast, and it's more visual. Okay, and the last thing we will go over are things to show. When you're deciding what to tell and what to show, I'm sorry, this sentence is not written right. Things you can show are emotions, activities, setting, personality, adversity, physical characteristics, and vague concepts. Actually, I don't think we're going to have vague concepts, but let's go on. Show descriptions. Show don't tell is most obvious with descriptions. Go into detail. Split up that one adjective into several smaller observations. If you give enough details, an image will pop in your reader's head. For example, the Ferris wheel looked fun. Well, that depends on who's reading and what they consider fun. Or you could show them the Ferris wheel had silly clowns painted on its sides, and its baskets had little umbrellas in red, green, and blue as canopies, which gives a better image. With the silly clowns is probably fun. Another example, the lovely Tessa entered the room. Now the telling shows her outer beauty, but you can create more depth to Tessa by showing her inner beauty. Tessa nodded politely in all directions until she had charmed everyone in the room with a warm smile. Well, she's lovely, but in this one, you're showing she's lovely inside and not just lovely outside. All right, you can show emotions. When you describe emotions, it's easy to say the character feels happy or sad or embarrassed. Instead of telling how your character feels, try to show it with body language or dialogue. We could say that Roger was bored, or we can show the reader Roger's foot tapped a steady rhythm as he yawned. He's yawning, tapping his foot, he's bored, and we can see he's bored. We can tell the reader Erica was annoyed that Mark still hadn't returned her book about climate change, or we can show them Erica looked him straight in the eye and said, "You still haven't returned my book about climate change. What are you waiting for? The polar caps to melt." So with her actions and her words, we know she's annoyed without the author telling the reader she's annoyed. You can show activities. Whatever your characters are doing, consider showing what they're doing. If the action is not very interesting or meaningful, a quick telling verb might be better, but it's worth exploring or going deeper. We can tell the reader, Henrietta ate a lot that day, or we could say, that day, Henrietta ate chicken with vegetable risotto, a huge bowl of mixed salad, fries, and 3 slices of that chocolate biscuit cake she just couldn't resist. So we are doing more than just saying she ate a lot. We're showing the reader what she ate and that it was a lot. I don't think I could get down 3 slices of chocolate biscuit cake after eating everything that went before it. And we have another telling example. Milo opened the door and shot the guy in the protective suit. Or we could show the reader, Milo opened the door, aimed with calm resolve, and shot the guy in the protective suit right between the eyes. Well, that adds a bit of irony. He thought he was protected. Well, his body, but what about right between the eyes? So that is a little more interesting than just saying the guy was shot. Let's talk about showing setting. Setting is a visual element of any story. Vague words cannot adequately create a visual image of your setting. If you show your setting, you can also create mood by asking yourself what in the setting evokes its mood. Now, what I have here is an example from Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, and he's describing Mordor in that book. So let's look at that a minute. Frodo was horrified by the landscape. Every rock formation reminded him of gravestones. And there were foul smells and eerie sights at every turn. The grasping pools were choked with ash and crawling muds, sickly white and gray, as if the mountains had vomited the filth of their entrails upon the lands about. High mounds of crushed and powdered rock, great cones of earth fire blasted and poison stained, stood like an obscene graveyard in endless rows, slowly revealed in the reluctant light. Tolkien shows us Mordor using sound, the gasping pools, motion, crawling muds, color, sickly white and gray, and metaphors, mountains vomiting, light being reluctant. The accents associated with the surroundings are violent and negative, creating a sense of foreboding and ominous danger. The atmosphere of death and decay permeates everything, even in how the rock structures resembled a graveyard. All right. Show personality. You can tell us everything about your character, but it is better if you show us by using most of what we have already covered in this lesson. Let's look at a few examples. Okay, first example. Abby sat near the exit at Starbucks sipping a latte while she made notes for her 10 o'clock business meeting. Suddenly, an impatient woman at the cash register withdrew a gun from her purse and demanded her cappuccino now. The exit door opened and closed. The latte abandoned. So what do we know about this businesswoman? She's preparing for her day. A dangerous situation develops. When she leaves, we can assume she's prudent. She's going to avoid trouble and run to safety before dialing 911. But we can change one word and show a less appealing personality. What if it read, the police officer sat near the exit at Starbucks, sipping a latte while he made notes for a 10 o'clock meeting. Suddenly, an impatient woman at the cash register withdrew a gun from her purse and demanded her cappuccino now. The exit door opened and closed. The latte abandoned. Now, because he is a police officer, this is not very complimentary to his personality. Both examples show something about their personality without the author telling you Abby is prudent and the police officer may very well be a coward. Readers know their characters best by seeing characters do things and say things, not by the author telling the reader about them. So avoid telling the reader what your character is like. Reveal who your character is by what they do and say, or by what other characters do and say. Let's look at one more example. Donald and his gang of misfits peeked into Anna's window. She held a mirror barely an inch from her nose as she carefully curled each eyelash. Then out of the blue, she picked up a lipstick, smeared it on, and kissed the mirror until she had covered it with little kiss marks. Extending the mirror to arm's length, she carefully studied her face, then smiled like she had met her soulmate. Jimmy pushed Donald away from the window and punched him to make the rest of the gang stop laughing at his sister. Now, this tells us quite a lot about each of the major characters in this paragraph. We know that Donald, the head of the gang, is a bad influence. We know that Anna is a little narcissistic. And we know that Jimmy loves his narcissistic sister enough to fight for her instead of laugh at her. But we're not telling the reader those things. We are showing them by their actions. We can show adversity. For example, we can tell the reader his life was full of struggles. Or we could show by saying he walked against an unseen wind. We can, if you're walking against the wind, it will be a struggle. This gives probably something most of us have experienced. This gives us a visual image. His life is a struggle, and the word unseen tells us he does not know why his life is a struggle. Another example, the weather was so bad, Mary could not reach the top of the mountain. We know the weather is bad, but we don't know if it was so bad it stopped her from trying, or she tried and the weather prevented her from making it to the top. So we can make it a little more visual by saying, rain descended in sheets, making it difficult to see as gale-force winds forced Mary backward. Her foot landed on a rock, twisting her ankle and sending her down the muddy path and over the ravine. So which is easier to see in your mind and to sympathize with poor Mary, who's doing the best she can and gets sent over the ravine? Now we know how bad the weather is, and we know why she didn't make it to the top without the author telling the reader that. The author has shown the reader. Another thing you can show is physical characteristics. If you are people watching in the mall, you can make quick characterizations. For example, that man is tall, that woman is skinny, but a writer cannot rely on what the eye can see because the reader only sees our words. We must stimulate the reader's imagination with words. We can say, Emma was too skinny for the dress, but that's a little vague. Or we could say, was she a size 14 trying to fit in a size 20? How could we show just how skinny she is? We could do something like this. The size 0 prom dress hung on Emma like a tent. In the second example, we know more than Emma is skinny. We now know Emma is so skinny she may be anorexic. We also know that she is a teenager simply by adding the word prom. Let's look at another example of telling. Ricky's weight created problems. In this sentence, we know Ricky has a weight problem, but it's vague. He could have a problem like Emma, too skinny for clothes to fit, or he could be overweight, or we could show the reader. The airline stewardess frowned. We can't take off until your seatbelt is attached. Ricky's face flushed bright red as he desperately tugged at the seatbelt that fell 6 inches short from reaching its mate. Now we know that he has a pretty good weight problem, and it is creating problems not only for him, but for everybody sitting on the plane. And we know that without the author telling us that. We know that his problem is so severe it's affecting his ability to travel. Now, I don't think I'm good. Okay, and I believe I have reached the end.